I did not do it for you. Keth's fins rippled with what might have been agitation. I did it for my people. The Vellerni know what it means to be judged without voice. We were quarantined for 600 cycles because our communication methods were considered too primitive for contact. When we finally gained membership, we swore we would never let another species suffer as we did. Lara stepped forward. Then help us. Keth's dark eyes studied her. Help you how? The tribunal has spoken. Morath has the support of the elder races, and they control the military. Even if every younger species voted to spare humanity, it would not be enough. Then we don't just need votes, David said. We need to break their coalition. Keth's scales flickered with interest. Explain. David took a breath. This was the gamble. This was the moment that would determine whether they had a chance or not. We've been listening to your transmissions for 2 years, he said. Not just the public debates. The private channels. The encrypted communications. Keth's fins went still. We know about the Valdori archives, David continued. The records they've kept hidden for millennia. The truth about why species get quarantined and why some never survive it. The silence stretched between them. David could see the conflict in Keth's eyes. The war between fear and hope. If you know about the archives, Keth said slowly, then you know what happens to those who speak of them. We know. And you would risk your entire species on exposing a secret that has been kept for 10,000 years. David met her gaze without flinching. Our species is already at risk. We have nothing left to lose. Keth was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. The archives contain records of 17 species. 17 civilizations that were quarantined over the past 3 millennia. None of them survived. Her gills fluttered with emotion. The official story is that they destroyed themselves. War, disease, environmental collapse. But the records tell a different truth. Laura's blood ran cold. What truth? They were allowed to die. Keth's scales darkened to a deep, angry blue. Not killed directly. That would violate tribunal law. But resources were withheld. Aid was delayed. Problems that could have been solved were left to fester until they consumed entire worlds. David felt sick. Why? Because they were threats. Not threats of violence. Threats of competition. Keth's voice hardened. The Valdori have held the High Arbiter position for 3,000 years. They control the trade routes, the military, the flow of information. Any species that might challenge their dominance is quarantined. Any species that survives quarantine and still shows potential is managed until they collapse. And humanity? Keth's dark eyes met his. Humanity terrifies them. You went from wooden ships to starships in 500 years. You decoded our encryption in 2. Your technology advances faster than any species in recorded history. She paused. If you were allowed to join the tribunal, you would dominate it within 1,000 years. The Valdori cannot permit that. The pieces clicked into place. David understood now why Resolution 9227 had passed so easily. Why Morath had been so quick to threaten extinction. This was never about humanity's violence, Dot. It was about humanity's potential. We need proof, Lavra said. We need something we can show the Assembly. Keth hesitated. Then she reached into a pouch at her side and produced a small crystalline chip, identical in design to the one David had shown in the Assembly chamber. This contains access codes to the archive, she said. But I warn you, if you are caught with this, it will not just be humanity that dies. It will be everyone who helped you. David took the chip. It was warm in his palm, alive with stored data. Why are you doing this? He asked. Keth's scales shifted to a soft, sad gold. Because I was a child when my people gained freedom. I remember the celebrations, the joy, the feeling that finally, we were part of something greater. Her voice wavered. And then I grew up and learned the truth, that the tribunal is not a family. It is a prison with comfortable cells, and the guards are very careful about who they let out. She moved toward the exit and paused. You have 2 days left, Ambassador. Use them wisely. She disappeared into the corridor, leaving David and Lavra alone with the weight of what they had learned. Lavra stared at the chip in David's hand. If we do this, she said, there's no going back. David nodded slowly. We expose the archives. We destroy the Valdori's legitimacy. The tribunal fractures. Civil war becomes possible. Or we save humanity and create something better. David closed his fist around the chip. Either way, the galaxy changes forever. Back on Earth, in a bunker beneath Geneva, Prime Director Anna Webb watched the live feed from the Nexus with growing dread. The classified reports were clear. The Tribunal's battle fleet was mobilizing. Thousands of ships from dozens of species, all converging on a single target, not humanity's hidden fleet. Earth itself. Her aide, Marcus Reed, stood at her shoulder. They're bypassing our ships completely, he said, using some kind of ancient gate technology to jump directly to the Sol system. Anna's jaw tightened. How long? 47 hours. Less than 2 days. Less than 2 days before the most powerful military force in the galaxy arrived at Earth's doorstep. Get me Admiral Torres, Anna said, and pray that David Cross pulls off a miracle. She stared at the screen, at the image of her ambassador standing alone against the might of 100 civilizations. 2 days. 2 days to change the fate of humanity. And somewhere in the depths of the Nexus station, a secret that had been buried for 10,000 years was about to see the light. The alarm screamed through the bunker at 0347 hours. Geneva time. Prime Director Anna Webb was on her feet before she was fully awake. Years of crisis training, overriding the fog of exhaustion. Red lights strobed through the command center as officers scrambled to their stations. Report, she demanded. Marcus Reed's face was pale in the emergency lighting. The Tribunal fleet. They're here. That's impossible. We had 47 hours. They use something called slipgate technology. Ancient, powerful. They crossed 200 light years in less than a day. Anna felt the blood drain from her face. On the main display, sensor data painted a terrifying picture. Hundreds of ships emerging from tiers in space itself, materializing in formation around Jupiter. The lead vessel was the size of a small moon, bristling with weapons that human science couldn't even identify. How many? Anna asked. 612 ships, 47 species, led by a Valdori dreadnought called the Judgment. Anna stared at the screen. 600 ships against humanity's 200. Ships that were already scattered and hidden throughout tribunal space. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, out of time. Get me Admiral Torres, she said, and open a channel to the Nexus. 15 light years away, David Cross was pulled from sleep by the urgent chime of his communication console. Lovra was already at the screen, her face grim. They moved early, she said. The fleet is in Sol system. David's stomach dropped. How long until they reach Earth? 18 hours. Maybe less. 18 hours. He had been promised 3 days and now had less than 1. Morath had lied. Or perhaps he had simply decided that humanity didn't deserve the courtesy of honoring a deadline. David's mind raced. The chip Keth had given him was still hidden in his quarters. The access codes to the archives were untouched. They had planned to infiltrate the data center tomorrow, to extract proof and broadcast it to the assembly. Now there was no tomorrow. We need to move, David said. Right now. Laura grabbed her sidearm. The corridors will be monitored. The moment we leave quarters, tribunal security will know. Then we need a distraction. David activated his console and typed a rapid message, encoded with the cipher he and Keth had established. The response came within minutes. The Vellerny delegation was ready to help. They moved through the station like ghosts, following maintenance corridors and service tunnels that Keth had mapped for them. The Nexus was ancient, built over thousands of years by species with different needs and different architectures. Its layout was chaotic, a maze of passages that even longtime residents didn't fully understand. Keth met them at the entrance to the archives. A massive door carved from solid metal and sealed with technology that predated the tribunal itself. "The codes will open the outer locks," she said, her scales flickering with nervous energy. "But the inner chamber is protected by something older, something biological." David frowned. Biological? Valdori blood. The archives were created by their ancestors. Only Valdori DNA can access the deepest records. Laura's hand tightened on her weapon. "So we're stuck." The silence was absolute. Ambassador David Cross stood at the entrance of the Grand Assembly Chamber, his heart pounding against his chest. Behind him, Captain Lavra Stone gripped the handle of her ceremonial sidearm, her knuckles white with tension. Neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. Before them stretched a sight no human had ever witnessed. The chamber was vast beyond imagination. It rose upward for what seemed like miles, a cathedral of light and shadow carved into the heart of a space station the size of a small moon. Thousands upon thousands of seats lined the walls in spiraling tiers, each one occupied by a creature more alien than the last. Some had scales that shimmered like liquid metal. Others floated in containment spheres filled with toxic gases. A few were nothing more than clouds of living light, pulsing with colors that human eyes could barely process. 300 species. 10,000 years of history. The Galactic Tribunal, the supreme governing body of known space. And humanity had just walked through its doors uninvited. High, Arbiter Morath sat at the center of the chamber on a throne carved from a single piece of black crystal. He was Valdori, one of the elder races, his body towering 15 feet tall with 4 arms folded across his chest. His skin was the color of deep space, and his eyes burned with the light of dying stars. Those eyes fixed on David with cold contempt. "You were not summoned," Morath said. His voice echoed through the chamber, translated instantly through David's neural implant. "How did you breach our borders?" David forced himself to breathe. He had prepared for this moment for 3 years. He had memorized every protocol, studied every species, learned the subtle art of galactic diplomacy from intercepted transmissions. But nothing could have prepared him for the weight of 1,000 alien gazes. "We received your invitation," David said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his throat. Morath's massive head tilted. "We sent no invitation." "No," David agreed. "You didn't, but you did send a vote." The chamber stirred. Whispers rippled through the alien delegates like wind through tall grass. David saw confusion on faces that shouldn't have been capable of human expression. He pressed forward. 18 months ago, the Galactic Tribunal passed Resolution 9227, a vote to extend the quarantine of Sector 881 Delta. That sector contains 1 star, 8 planets, and a single species classified as pre-contact primitive. You voted to keep them isolated for another 1,000 cycles. David paused. The silence was deafening. That species was humanity. That star was our sun. And you voted on our future without telling us we existed to be judged. The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates screamed in languages that sounded like music, like thunder, like breaking glass. Morath raised one massive hand, and slowly, painfully, Order returned. You decoded our transmissions, he said. It wasn't a question. We did more than that. David reached into his diplomatic pouch and produced a small crystalline device. We've been listening to your debates about us for 2 years. We heard what you said. We heard the votes. We heard the reasons. He activated the device, and a holographic display flickered to life above his palm. It showed excerpts from tribunal recordings, translated into human text. Humans are violent beyond rehabilitation. There. Broadcasts show constant warfare. They will destroy themselves. Within 300 cycles, quarantine is mercy compared to what they would face in the wider galaxy. David let the words hang in the air. You decided we were too dangerous to know about you, he said. Too primitive to understand. Too violent to trust. And you made that decision without ever speaking to us. Without ever asking us who we were. Lara stepped forward beside him, her military bearing radiating controlled power. We came here to ask one question. What gives you the right? Morith's burning eyes narrowed. 10,000 years of peace gives us the right. The tribunal has maintained order across this galaxy since before your species climbed down from the trees. We have ended wars. We have prevented extinctions. We have lifted civilizations from barbarism. And you've decided which civilizations get to live, David countered. Which ones get to grow. Which ones get locked away until they die. Quarantine protects young species from exploitation. Quarantine prevented us from knowing we weren't alone. Do you have any idea what that cost us? Centuries of philosophers asking if there was other life in the universe. Billions of people looking at the stars and wondering. You had the answer the whole time, and you chose to let us suffer in ignorance. A new voice cut through the tension. It came from a serpentine delegate whose scales shifted through patterns of blue and gold. The human speaks with passion, she said. But passion is not wisdom. Your species has fought 2 global wars in the last century alone. You have weapons capable of destroying your own planet. You broadcast your violence across space for anyone to see. She leaned forward, her forked tongue flickering. Tell me, Ambassador, why should we believe you are ready? David turned to face her directly. Because we're here. The serpent's eyes widened slightly. You placed monitoring stations in our asteroid belt, David continued. You watched us for 70 years. And in that time, we went from splitting the atom to standing in your chamber. We decoded your encryption. We built ships that could cross the stars. We found you before you were ready to find us. He let the words sink in. You wanted to know if humanity was dangerous? Here's your answer. We're dangerous enough to reach you despite every barrier you put in our way. And we're smart enough to do it without firing a single shot. Morith rose from his throne. The movement was slow, deliberate, and terrifying. Standing at his full height, he seemed less like a living being and more like a force of nature. You threatened the tribunal? No, David shook his head. I'm telling you that the quarantine failed. Humanity is here now. You can't put us back in the cage. So the question isn't whether we're ready for the galaxy. He met the High Arbiter's burning gaze without flinching. The question is whether the galaxy is ready for us. The chamber fell silent again. But this time, the silence was different. David could feel the shift in the air, the subtle change in how the delegates looked at him. Not with contempt anymore, not with fear. Morith stood motionless for a long moment. Then, slowly, he raised one of his 4 hands and pressed a control on his throne. A new hologram appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed a star map, a web of connected systems spanning thousands of light years. And at the edge of that web, a single yellow star blinked with warning lights. Sol, Earth's sun, humanity's home. You broke the quarantine, Morith said. The penalty for that is clear. Your world will be cleansed. Your species will be added to the archive of failed civilizations. This is not revenge, Ambassador. This is law. David felt the blood drain from his face. Laura's hand moved toward her sidearm. You would commit genocide, David breathed. For the crime of wanting to exist? We would prevent a greater catastrophe. Morith's voice held no emotion. Your kind has shown what you are. Violent, aggressive, unpredictable. If we allow you to spread among the stars, you will bring war to peaceful worlds. You will destroy what we have spent millennia building. You don't know that. We have seen it before. Morith's eyes flickered with something that might have been ancient pain. Other species have risen as you have, fast, hungry, brilliant and terrible. They burned through the galaxy like fire. Millions died before they were stopped. David's mind raced. He had prepared for rejection. He had prepared for negotiation. He had not prepared for extinction, but Lavra spoke before he could. Then you should know something, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Before we came here, we left instructions with our fleet. Morith's eyes snapped to her. What fleet? Lavra smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The one hiding behind your monitoring stations. She pressed a button on her wrist communicator. The star map flickered. And suddenly, the warning lights around Sol weren't the only ones blinking. 200 points of light appeared scattered throughout tribunal space, hidden in asteroid fields, lurking behind gas giants, waiting in the dark spaces between stars. 200 human warships. You thought we came alone, Lavra said. You thought we were stupid enough to walk into the heart of our enemy with nothing but words. You spent 70 years watching us fight each other. Maybe you should have paid attention to what we learned. The chamber erupted again, but this time the chaos was tinged with something new. Panic. Morith's burning eyes blazed with fury. You would start a war you cannot win. Maybe, David admitted, but we would finish it. And so would you. Mutual destruction isn't victory, High Arbiter. It's just death for everyone. He stepped forward, his voice rising to carry across the chamber. We didn't come here to threaten you. We came to offer you a choice. You can destroy Earth and watch your empire burn in retaliation. Or you can give us a seat at this table and find out what humanity can build when we're not fighting for survival. The silence stretched for an eternity. Then Morith spoke, his voice low and dangerous. You have 3 days. Convince the tribunal to reverse its decision, or your world dies. The hologram vanished. The chamber began to empty, and David Cross stood in the heart of an alien empire, knowing that the future of 8 billion people rested on what he did next. 3 days to change the course of history. 3 days to save humanity. The clock had started. The door sealed behind them with a hiss of pressurized air, and David Cross finally allowed himself to collapse against the wall. His legs were shaking. His hands trembled. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on him like a physical force. 3 days, Lavra said, pacing the small diplomatic quarters like a caged animal. 3 days to convince 300 species to let us live. David closed his eyes. We knew this was possible. Possible and real are different things. Lavra stopped pacing and turned to face him. David, they're going to kill everyone. 8 billion people. Children. Families. Everything humanity has ever built. I know. Then what do we do? David opened his eyes. The quarters were sparse but functional, a small living space attached to a communication hub and a meditation alcove designed for species with different spiritual needs. Through the window, he could see the curve of the Nexus station, its massive ring structure glowing with the light of 1,000 civilizations. We do what humans have always done, he said. We fight. Not with weapons, but with words. With ideas. With truth. Lavra shook her head. They've already made up their minds. You saw their faces. They think we're monsters. Not all of them. David pushed himself off the wall and walked to the communication console. I watched the voting records. Resolution 9227 passed with 73% support. That means 27% voted against it. 27% of 300 species thought we deserved a chance. Laura's eyes narrowed. That's still a minority. A minority that might be willing to listen. David began pulling up files on the console, sorting through the data they had gathered during their 2 years of surveillance. Species profiles, voting records, political alliances. The tribunal was not monolithic. It was a collection of competing interests held together by ancient treaties and mutual fear. Here, David highlighted a cluster of entries. The Valrani. They're an aquatic species from the Outer Rim. They were quarantined themselves 400 years ago and only achieved full membership 2 centuries back. They voted against extending our quarantine. Lavra leaned in. Why? Because they remember what it was like. The isolation. The feeling of being judged without representation. David pulled up another file. And they're not alone. The Korathi, the Salmani, the Drev Collective. All of them have histories of quarantine or near quarantine. All of them voted no. So we find the sympathizers and try to flip the vote. We find the sympathizers and try to change the conversation. David turned to face her. Right now, this is about whether humanity is too dangerous to exist. We need to make it about something else. About fairness. About justice. About whether the tribunal has the right to exterminate a species without ever speaking to them. Lavra was silent for a moment, processing. Then she nodded slowly. It's a long shot. It's the only shot we have. They worked through the night. David drafted messages while Lavra analyzed the political landscape, identifying which delegates might be receptive and which were too loyal to the elder races. By morning, they had a list of 37 species that might be willing to listen. The first response came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Keth of the Valrani agreed to meet them in a neutral location, a decommissioned maintenance bay on the station's lower levels. David and Lavra arrived to find a being unlike anything they had imagined. Keth was beautiful in an alien way. Her body was sleek and streamlined, designed for movement through water, with iridescent scales that shifted through shades of blue and green. She breathed through gills that fluttered with each word, and her eyes were large and dark, reflecting light like pools of deep ocean. You are brave to come here, Keth said. Her voice was musical, translated through David's implant with surprising warmth. Or foolish. Maybe both, David admitted. Thank you for meeting us. Not necessarily. Keth's dark eyes met David's. The Valdori are not the only species whose ancestors walked these halls. 10,000 years ago, when the archives were created, there were others. Species that the Valdori have tried to erase from history. David thought of the 17 civilizations that had been quarantined and destroyed. The species that had been allowed to die. The extinct races, he breathed. Their DNA is still in the system. Keth nodded. And their genetic code was not so different from yours. David stared at her. You're saying human DNA might work? I'm saying that life in this galaxy shares common origins. The Valdori don't want anyone to know that, but it's true. Your ancestors and theirs came from the same cosmic seeds, scattered across the stars billions of years ago. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble based on ancient genetic theory and wild hope. But it was the only shot they had. David stepped forward and pressed his palm against the inner door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the metal hummed with power. Lights flickered along the door's surface, tracing patterns that hadn't been activated in millennia. And slowly, impossibly, the door began to open. It worked, Lavra whispered. How? Keth's scales shifted to a wondering silver. Because the Valdore told the truth about one thing. Life in this galaxy is connected. All of us, humans, Valdore, the species they destroyed. We are all branches of the same ancient tree. The archives stretched before them like a cathedral of light. Holographic displays hung in the air, containing records of civilizations that had risen and fallen across 10,000 years. David walked among them, reading names he had never heard, seeing faces of beings long dead, the Corvani, who developed faster than light, communication before any other species, and were quarantined for threatening. Valdore control of information networks, the Brethi, whose medical technology could have cured diseases across 100 worlds, but were isolated because their healing arts made them too influential. The Malin, whose mathematical genius allowed them to predict economic trends and were deemed too dangerous to compete with. 17 species, 17 civilizations, all of them brilliant, all of them potential rivals to Valdore dominance, all of them dead. David found the proof in a file marked termination protocols. It contained detailed records of how each quarantine had been managed, how aid had been delayed, how crises had been manipulated to ensure maximum damage. The Valdore had not killed these species directly. They had simply watched them die and called it natural selection. This is murder, Lavra said, her voice shaking with rage. 10,000 years of murder dressed up as law. David copied the files to a portable storage device. And now everyone's going to know. They emerged from the archives to find the station in chaos. Keth's distraction had worked better than planned. The Velrani delegation had called an emergency session to protest the early deployment of the Tribunal fleet, and delegates from a dozen sympathetic species had joined them. The assembly chamber was in an uproar. David ran toward the chamber, the evidence clutched in his hand. Lavra and Keth flanked him, ready for whatever came next. They burst through the doors to find High Arbiter Morath at the podium, his burning eyes blazing with cold fury. Order, Morath commanded. There will be order. There will be truth, David shouted back. His voice carried across the chamber, amplified by the acoustic design that allowed every delegate to hear. You want to destroy humanity for the crime of wanting to exist. But the real crime isn't ours. He raised the storage device. For 10,000 years, the Valdore have used quarantine as a weapon, not to protect young species, not to maintain peace, but to eliminate any civilization that might challenge their power. The chamber fell silent. David activated the device. Holographic records bloomed across the ceiling, displaying the evidence for all to see. Names, dates, deliberate decisions to withhold aid. Internal communications celebrating the collapse of quarantined worlds. 17 species, David said. 17 civilizations murdered by neglect. And humanity was supposed to be number 18. Morath's forearms trembled with rage. These records are fabricated. Human lies designed to. These records are from your own archives. Keth stepped forward, her scales blazing with defiant color. Sealed with Valdore bloodlocks. Accessible only to those your ancestors deemed worthy. The humans open them because their DNA carries the same ancient markers as every species in this chamber. We are all connected, and you have been killing our family for millennia. The chamber erupted. Delegates screamed accusations. Others called for verification. The serpentine species that had questioned David in their first meeting was shouting for Morath's removal. And through it all, the evidence hung above them like an unavoidable truth. Morath raised his hand, trying to restore order. But for the first time in 3,000 years, the tribunal ignored the High Arbiter. The coalition was fracturing, but David knew it wasn't enough. The fleet was still heading for Earth. 18 hours had become 14. Even if the tribunal reversed its decision, the ships might not receive the order in time. And then a new voice cut through the chaos. The evidence is authentic. Everyone turned. A Valdori delegate stood at the edge of the chamber, her form smaller than Morith's, but radiating quiet authority. Her eyes burned with the same starlight, but her expression was different. Sad, tired, old. Elder Vera, Morith snarled. You would betray your own people? I would save them. Vera walked slowly toward the podium, her 4 arms hanging loose at her sides. I have lived for 800 years, Morath. I remember when the tribunal was founded. I remember what we promised each other after the Great War, peace, cooperation, a galaxy where no species would fear. Extermination. She stopped before the holographic. Evidence. We became the thing we fought to destroy. And now a species that has existed for barely a moment of cosmic time has shown us our reflection. Vera turned to face David. You asked, what gives us the right to judge humanity? The answer is nothing. We have no right. We never did. David's heart pounded. Then recall the fleet. Vera shook her head. I cannot. Command authority rests with the High Arbiter. All eyes turned to Morath. The Valdori leader stood rigid on the podium, his burning eyes fixed on the evidence of his crimes. David could see the calculation behind those eyes, the cold weighing of options. And Morath smiled. Recall the fleet? His voice was soft, almost gentle. The fleet is not under tribunal command. It is under mine. And humanity will burn regardless of what this assembly decides. He raised his hand, and a new hologram appeared. Earth, fragile and blue, orbited by hundreds of alien warships. Watch, Morath said. Watch as I correct the mistake your ancestors made when they allowed humans to evolve at all. The lead ship powered its weapons. And 14 light years away, 8 billion people looked up at a sky that was about to fall. The judgment fired. Beam of concentrated gravity lanced down from orbit, striking the Pacific Ocean, 200 miles west of California. The water vaporized instantly. The shock wave traveled faster than sound, and by the time the people of Los Angeles heard the impact, the tsunami was already forming. 3 million people died in the first 60 seconds. In the Geneva bunker. Prime Director Anna Webb watched the devastation through satellite feeds that flickered and died as the electromagnetic pulse from the attack fried every sensor in the Western Hemisphere. Her hands gripped the console until her knuckles went white. Casualties? She asked, her voice hollow. Still counting, Marcus Reed replied. But the secondary tsunamis are reaching the Asian coast. Tokyo, Manila, Shanghai. We're looking at tens of millions. Anna closed her eyes. She had known this was possible. She had prepared contingency plans for exactly this scenario. But nothing could have prepared her for the weight of watching her world die. Admiral Torres, she said. Status of our fleet. Torres's face appeared on a secondary screen, her expression hard and focused despite the chaos around her. We're scattered across tribunal space. Even at maximum burn, it would take us 3 days to reach Sol System. We don't have 3 days. I know. Torres paused. But we might have something else. Anna leaned forward. Explain. The Valdori ship, the Judgment. It's powerful, but it's not indestructible. Our intelligence suggests it requires a 12-hour recharge between major weapons discharges. If the ground defenses can hold for 12 hours, we don't have ground defenses. We never expected an attack from orbit. Torres was silent for a moment. Then she spoke again, her voice carrying a weight that Anna recognized. The weight of a terrible idea. We have nuclear weapons. Anna's blood ran cold. You want to nuke our own planet? I want to nuke the space directly above our planet. A coordinated launch of every nuclear weapon in our arsenal, detonating in a pattern designed to create a debris field and radiation barrier. It won't destroy the Valdori ships, but it might blind them long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Reinforcements from where? Torres smiled grimly. From our new friends. On the Nexus, David Cross watched the attack on Earth through holographic displays that updated in real time. The devastation was beyond anything he had imagined. Entire cities wiped from existence. Coastlines reshaped by tsunamis. Smoke and fire visible from space. His home was burning, and he was 15 light years away, helpless to stop it. We need to go, Lara said, her hand on his arm. Staying here won't save anyone. Going won't either. David's voice was flat. The fleet can't reach Earth in time. The tribunal won't act against Morath. It's over. It's not over. Keth moved to stand before him, her scales pulsing with urgent light. Morath controls the Valdori military, but he doesn't control everyone. The species that voted against the quarantine, the ones who saw your evidence, they have ships. They have weapons. And right now, they're deciding whether to use them. David looked up. Against their own tribunal? Against a tyrant who just committed genocide on a live broadcast. Keth's dark eyes burned with determination. The galaxy is watching, Ambassador. They saw your evidence. They saw Morath's response. And for the first time in 10,000 years, they're questioning whether the Valdori deserve to lead. The assembly chamber was chaos made manifest. Delegates screamed at each other in 100 languages. Morath had retreated to his private quarters, surrounded by loyal Valdori guards. The great coalition that had ruled the galaxy for millennia was shattering before David's eyes. And in the middle of it all, Elder Vera stood like a rock in a storm. David approached her cautiously. The ancient Valdori had defied her own leader, had confirmed the truth of the archives. But he still didn't know whose side she was truly on. Elder, he said, millions of my people are dead. Vera's burning eyes dimmed with something that might have been grief. I know, and I am sorry. Morath has done what I always feared he would do. Can you stop him? Vera was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with age. There is a weapon on the Valdori homeworld. Ancient, terrible. It predates the tribunal itself, built during the Great War, as a last resort against extinction. Morath has activated its targeting systems. David's heart stopped. What kind of weapon? We called it the Cleansing Fire. It was designed to sterilize entire star systems, to ensure that no enemy could ever threaten us again. Vera closed her eyes. Morath intends to use it on Sol, not just your planet, your entire system. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid. Nothing will survive. David felt the floor tilt beneath him. The attack from orbit was just the beginning. The real weapon hadn't even been deployed yet. How do we stop it? The weapon is controlled from a facility on our homeworld, buried beneath the ruins of the old city. It can only be deactivated from inside. Then we go there. Vera shook her head. You would never reach it. The homeworld is the most heavily defended system in the galaxy. Then we don't go alone. David turned to face the chamber, raising his voice above the chaos. Listen to me, all of you. The shouting died down. Delegates turned to face the small human standing among the ruins of galactic order. Morath has activated something called the Cleansing Fire, a weapon that will destroy not just Earth, but our entire star system. Trillions of miles of space earned to nothing. David's voice rang through the chamber. This isn't punishment anymore. This is extermination. And if he succeeds with humanity, how long before he turns that weapon on anyone else who defies him? Silence. Then the serpentine delegate, who had challenged David in their first meeting, slithered forward. Her scales were dark with fury, her eyes blazing. "My name is Yessa of the Veth Collective," she said. 2,000 years ago, my people were quarantined. We survived only because we had resources the Valdori needed. But I have always known that our safety was an illusion." She turned to face the chamber. "Today, that illusion ends. I call upon every species that values freedom to stand against this tyranny." Another delegate rose. Then another. And another. Within minutes, representatives from 63 species had pledged their support. Ships began launching from the Nexus, forming the core of a rebel fleet that had never existed before today. Humanity was no longer alone. But David knew that ships alone wouldn't be enough. Someone had to reach the weapon. Someone had to shut it down from inside. He turned to Laura. "I have to go." She nodded slowly. "I know. The fleet will draw their attention. Create an opening. But I'll need a small team to infiltrate the facility." "You'll need more than that." Laura's hand closed on her sidearm. "You'll need someone who knows how to fight." David managed a small smile. "Are you volunteering?" "Someone has to keep you alive long enough to save the world." They gathered their team in the hours that followed. Keth would provide navigation through Valdori space. A Korathi combat specialist named Theron joined them, his massive frame and armored hide making him ideal for frontline fighting. And Dr. Maya Cole, a human scientist who had helped decode the original Valdori transmissions, would handle the technical aspects of shutting down an ancient weapon. 5 beings from 4 species, united against the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced. The rebel fleet launched for the Valdori homeworld at maximum speed. David watched the stars streak past the viewport of their small infiltration craft, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Humanity had built spaceships to reach for the stars. They had decoded alien languages to understand their cosmic neighbors. They had hidden a fleet across 200 light years because they knew somehow that the universe would not welcome them peacefully. And now they were racing toward a world that had been the center of galactic power for 10,000 years, hoping to shut down a weapon that had been built to destroy civilizations. David thought about Earth, about the cities burning, about the people who had died and the billions more who might die if they failed. He thought about what Morath had said about humanity's violence and aggression and unpredictability. And he realized something. Morath was right. Humanity was violent. They had fought wars over land and resources and ideology. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their own planet. They had broadcast their conflicts across the cosmos for anyone to see. But Morath had missed something important. Humanity was also capable of sacrifice, of courage, of standing up to impossible odds, because it was the right thing to do. They had fought each other, yes, but they had also saved each other. They had built hospitals and schools and shelters. They had traveled to the moon and dreamed of the stars. They were not monsters. They were simply human, flawed and brilliant and capable of both great evil and great good. And today, they would prove which one mattered more. The Valdori homeworld appeared on sensors 3 hours later. A massive planet surrounded by defense platforms and warships, the heart of an empire that had ruled for millennia. The rebel fleet engaged the defenders. Space lit up with weapons fire, and a small infiltration craft slipped through the chaos, heading for the surface of a world that held the key to humanity's survival. David watched the battle unfold behind them as they descended through the atmosphere. 5 people against the end of the world. The odds had never been worse, but humanity had never been good at accepting impossible odds. Infiltration craft crashed through the upper atmosphere of the Valdori homeworld, its heat shield screaming under the stress. David gripped his restraints as the ship bucked and shuddered. Watching the sensor display, Count down the altitude with terrifying speed. 30 seconds to landing zone, Theron announced from the pilot's seat. The Korathi's massive hands moved across the controls with surprising delicacy. Defense platforms have not detected us. The rebel fleet is drawing their attention. David looked out the viewport. The sky was on fire. Thousands of ships fought and died in the space above them, buying time with their lives for this one desperate mission. Make it count, Lavra said quietly. The ship slammed into the surface with enough force to rattle David's teeth. Theron killed the engines, and the hatch blew open, revealing a landscape of crumbling ruins beneath, a sky of smoke and distant stars. The old city Dot, it had been the center of Valdori civilization 10,000 years ago, before the Great War had devastated the surface. Now it was a memorial to an ancient conflict, preserved in silence while the new capital rose in orbit above Dot, and somewhere beneath these ruins. The cleansing fire weighted Dot. They moved through the rubble with careful speed. Kef led the way, her aquatic body moving with surprising grace across the broken terrain. David followed, then Lavra, then Maya. Theron brought up the rear, his armored form providing cover against any pursuit. The entrance should be ahead, Keth said. Vera's coordinates indicated a sealed chamber beneath the central temple. David spotted the temple through the haze. It was massive, a tower of black crystal that had somehow survived the destruction around it. Its surface was covered in ancient writing that his translator couldn't decode. Old Valdori, Maya breathed, before the standardized language was developed. This structure is at least 12,000 years old. Lavra scanned the perimeter. No guards. That's wrong. She was right. A weapon capable of destroying star systems should have had security. The fact that it didn't meant one of two things. Either the Valdori were so confident in their orbital defenses that they hadn't bothered with ground forces, or someone was waiting inside. David suspected the latter. They entered the temple through a breach in the western wall. The interior was dark, lit only by faint bioluminescence from fungal growths that had colonized the ancient stone. The air smelled of age and dust and something else, something that reminded David of thunderstorms. Power readings ahead, Maya said, consulting her scanner. Massive energy signature. The weapon is active. They descended through levels of ruins, following the energy readings deeper into the planet's crust. The architecture changed as they went down. The elegant crystal gave way to brutal metal. The ceremonial halls became reinforced corridors designed to withstand planetary bombardment. And then they reached the chamber. It was vast. A dome carved from solid bedrock, hundreds of meters across, dominated by a structure that David's mind struggled to comprehend. The cleansing fire was not a weapon in any conventional sense. It was a machine, yes, but it was also something more. Something organic. Living technology that pulsed with light and heat. Connected to the planet itself through networks of cables and conduits that disappeared into the rock. And standing before it, waiting for them. Was Morhoth. The High Arbiter looked different here? Smaller. Older. The burning light in his eyes had dimmed to embers, and his 4 arms hung at his sides like weights. I knew you would come, Morhoth said. The human who broke the quarantine. The species that refused to accept its place in the natural order. David stepped forward, shut down the weapon. Morhoth laughed. It was a tired sound, empty of humor. Do you know what this device is, Ambassador? It is not merely a weapon. It is a choice. The choice my ancestors made 10,000 years ago, when they faced extermination at the hands of species they had never met. He turned to face the pulsing machine. We were the primitives once, the violent ones, the species that other civilizations looked at and saw only danger. They quarantined us. They isolated us. They watched us struggle and suffer and die. Moreth's voice hardened. But we survived. We learned. We became stronger than they could imagine. And when we finally broke free, we made a vow. Never again would the Valdori be at the mercy of others. Never again would we be judged by beings who did not understand us. David understood now. The whole terrible history clicked into place. You became the thing you hated, he said. You escaped quarantine and built the tribunal to make sure no one else ever could. We built order from chaos. Moreth turned to face him. 10,000 years of peace. 10,000 years of stability. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How many civilizations have risen and fallen while the tribunal endured? Peace built on murder isn't peace. It's just quiet tyranny. And what would you have us do? Moreth's voice rose. Allow every young species to stumble into the stars? Let them make the same mistakes we made. The galaxy burned once, Ambassador. Trillions died. The tribunal exists to ensure that never happens again. David shook his head. The tribunal exists to keep the Valdori in power. You don't protect young species. You eliminate threats to your dominance. Is that not the same thing? Moreth stepped closer. Your species is brilliant, adaptable, dangerous. In 1,000 years, you would eclipse everything we have built. The tribunal would become a human empire, shaped by human values, fighting human wars. You don't know that. I know what we did when we gained power. Moreth's burning eyes met David's. We conquered. We destroyed. We built the cleansing fire because we were terrified of what would happen if we didn't. And now you ask me to believe that humanity would be different? David was silent for a moment behind him. Lavra had her weapon raised. Theron was ready to charge. Keth and Maya stood frozen, watching the confrontation unfold, and David realized something. Moreth was not wrong. Humanity might conquer. Humanity might destroy. Given power, given time, humanity might become exactly what the Valdori feared. The violence that had been broadcast across the stars was real. The wars were real. The capacity for terrible destruction was real. But so was something else. You're right, David said. Moreth blinked. What? You're right about us. Humanity is capable of everything you fear. We've proven it 1,000 times. We've killed each other over land, over resources, over nothing at all. We've built weapons that could destroy our own world. David paused. But we've also done something else. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. We've changed. Not perfectly, not completely, but we've changed. 200 years ago, we enslaved people based on the color of their skin. Now we send them into space. 100 years ago, we fought world wars. Now we've united enough to build a fleet and stand here before you. Moreth's eyes flickered with uncertainty. You want to know what makes humanity different from the Valdori? David continued. It's not that we're less violent. It's that we're willing to admit we can be better. We're willing to try. We don't look at our worst moments and accept them as our destiny. We look at them and ask how we can do better next time. Pretty words, Moreth said. But words do not stop wars. No, actions do. David reached out his hand. You can destroy Earth, burn everything we've built. Add humanity to your list of extinct threats. And in 1,000 years, another species will rise. And you'll destroy them too. And another. And another. Until eventually, one of them succeeds where we failed. He let the words hang in the air. Or you can take a risk. Let us live. Let us prove what humanity can become. And maybe, just maybe, we'll surprise you. Moreth stared at his outstretched hand. Why would I trust you? Because you were us once. You were the quarantine species. The primitives. The ones who everyone said would destroy everything. David's voice softened. And someone, somewhere, decided to give you a chance. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. The chamber was silent. Morath stood motionless, his forearms hanging at his sides, his burning eyes locked on David's face. A cleansing fire pulsed behind him, ready to erase 8 billion lives with a single command. And then, slowly, impossibly, Morath reached out and took David's hand. I hope you are worth the risk, Ambassador. He turned and walked to the control interface. His hands moved across panels that had not been touched in millennia, and the cleansing fire went dark. The weapon was dead. Humanity was safe. The aftermath was chaos. But it was a different kind of chaos. The kind that comes when old orders collapse and new ones struggle to be born. Morath surrendered himself to the rebel fleet. He would face trial for his crimes, not by humanity, but by the species he had wronged for thousands of years. The evidence from the archives ensured that there could be no denial, no deflection. The Valdore did not fall, but they stepped back from power. Elder Vera assumed leadership of her people, dedicating herself to repairing the damage that millennia of fear had caused, and the Galactic Tribunal did not dissolve. It transformed. 3 months after the Battle of Valdore Prime, David Cross stood in the assembly chamber. The same chamber where he had first been told that humanity was too dangerous to exist. The same chamber where Morath had threatened to burn his world. But today, the chamber looked different. Today, the delegates were not watching him with fear or contempt. Today, they were watching with something that might have been hope. Keth stood at the podium. She had been elected High Arbiter by a coalition of younger species, the first non-elder leader in 10,000 years. The quarantine system is hereby abolished, she announced. From this day forward, no species will be isolated without representation. No civilization will be judged without voice. And no power will be allowed to decide the fate of others in secret. She turned to face David. Ambassador David Cross, you came to this chamber seeking recognition for humanity. Today, you receive more than that. Humanity is granted full membership in the Galactic Tribunal, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. The chamber erupted in applause. Not from every delegate. Some sat in sullen silence, still clinging to the old ways. But enough. Enough to matter. Enough to make it real. David stepped forward to accept the formal documents. As he did, Keth leaned close. What will humanity do now? She asked quietly. With your seat at the table? With your place among the stars? David looked out at the chamber, at the hundreds of alien faces watching him, at the vast, impossibly complex tapestry of civilizations that humanity had just joined. We'll make mistakes, he admitted. Probably a lot of them. But we'll learn. We'll grow. And maybe, if we're lucky, we'll help build something better than what came before. Keth's scales shifted to a warm gold. That is all anyone can ask. 6 months later, David stood on a balcony overlooking New Angeles. The city had been rebuilt on the ruins of the old one, a monument to survival and hope. Ships from a dozen species filled the sky. Trading vessels and scientific expeditions and diplomatic envoys. Laura stood beside him, watching the sunset paint the clouds in shades of orange and gold. We did it, she said. David nodded slowly. We did. So what happens now? He smiled. Now we find out if I was right. If humanity really can be better than our history suggests. Laura laughed. No pressure. They stood together in silence, watching their world transform. Watching the ships from 100 civilizations pass overhead. Watching the future unfold. Humanity had not been invited to the galaxy, but they were here now. Part of something greater than themselves. Ready to prove that the universe had made the right choice in letting them live. And somewhere, in the depths of space, A young species on a quarantined world looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. They weren't, not anymore.